The Battle of the Atlantic did not turn first on the open sea. It turned on a painted floor in Liverpool. A 21-year-old Wren moved a black wooden submarine into the one place the Royal Navy had trained itself not to look. Inside the convoy, not outside the escort screen, not beyond the perimeter. Inside it, and once she put it there, the losses finally made sense. By March 1943, the North Atlantic was close to breaking. In the first 20 days of that month, German U-boats sank 82 Allied ships. 476,000 long tons went to the bottom, the heaviest monthly loss the Battle of the Atlantic had ever seen. Britain was already importing less food than it needed. The convoys were not just carrying cargo. They were carrying the possibility that Britain could stay in the war. Karl Dönitz had roughly 240 operational U-boats. His wolf packs were no longer just hunting ships. They were testing whether the Allied supply line could survive mathematics, and the mathematics were turning against the Allies. The official British answer to a U-boat contact was a tactic called Buttercup. It had been built at sea by escort commanders who understood danger in the most immediate way possible. Black water, bad weather, sonar echoes, and torpedoes arriving without warning. Buttercup assumed the submarine was outside the convoy. So when a contact appeared, escort ships would swing outward. Fire flares, illuminate the surface, force the U-boat down with ASDIC and depth charges, and protect the perimeter. The convoy itself kept moving. It sounded logical. It looked logical on paper. And for years it was wrong in the one way that mattered. Ships were dying in the middle, not on the exposed edge. Not just in the rear columns. In the protected interior, surrounded by other ships, far from where the attacking submarine was supposed to be. The escorts were where they had been ordered to be. The sonar was working. The reports were consistent, but the doctrine had no place to put the evidence. Since the First World War, Allied naval thinking had treated the U-boat attack as an outside problem. A submarine would sit beyond the escort screen, fire across the gap, and try to escape before the escorts could punish it. The geometry seemed to support that belief. Escorts might operate about 5,000 yards from the convoy's edge. German torpedoes could reach a little farther than that under the right conditions. So the picture was simple. The danger was outside. The shield was the perimeter. The answer was to push outward. But every convoy report that showed torpedoes striking the center of the formation was quietly asking the same impossible question. What if the danger was already inside the shield? At Western Approaches Command, that question landed in Derby House, Liverpool. The building was known as the Citadel. Above its operations rooms on the top floor, Commander Gilbert Roberts had been ordered to build something the Navy did not fully understand yet, a tactical wargaming unit for anti-submarine warfare. Roberts had once been a seagoing officer, but tuberculosis had invalided him out of active service before the war. He asked for trained men, mathematicians, tacticians, officers who could model convoy warfare. He did not get them. Instead, Vera Lawton Matthews, the head of the Women's Royal Naval Service, sent him the best women she had. The first through the door was Jean Laidlaw. She was Scottish, about 21, a former insurance clerk, a former sea ranger, and newly trained as a Wren officer. On paper, she was not the person tradition expected to solve a naval crisis. She had not commanded a destroyer. She had not served through a North Atlantic gale. She was not allowed to go to sea in the job whose tactics she was about to change. But Laidlaw had two things the Navy badly needed. She could read a system, and she could notice the one wrong number that made every other number on the page collapse. The war room floor at WATO was not grand. It was linoleum, painted into squares, each square representing 1 nautical mile of ocean. Wooden counters stood for escorts and U-boats. Blackboards showed convoy formations. Wire wool became smoke. Cloth screens blocked the player's view, so escort commanders could see only what a real captain at sea might know. A partial report, a bearing, a flash, a guess. Roberts and Laidlaw were not playing games to entertain admirals. They were rebuilding disasters, escort reports, battle logs, position data, torpedo hits, the precise places where men had died. Then they ran the action again on the floor. At first they placed the U-boat where doctrine said it belonged. Outside the convoy, the result did not match the facts, so Laidlaw changed the position. She moved the submarine inside the escort screen, surfaced, approaching from astern in darkness. That single movement changed the whole ocean. A surface Type 7 U-boat could move fast enough in calm conditions to overtake many convoy formations. At night, low against the water, running on diesels, it could be almost invisible. It did not have to shoot across the whole defensive screen. It could slip in from behind. Then, from inside the convoy, it could fire broadside into the center columns. After that, it could dive below the practical reach of hull-mounted ASDIC, let the convoy pass over it, then surface astern, outside the screen again. No heroic magic, no impossible weapon, no failure of courage by the escorts. Just a route no one had defended. Buttercup was not failing because the sailors were weak. Buttercup was failing because it was answering the wrong question. Laidlaw brought the pattern to Roberts. Roberts brought it to Admiral Sir Percy Noble, Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches. Noble was not a fool. He was more open to unconventional analysis than many senior officers of his generation. But even for him, the claim was difficult to accept. A 21-year-old Wren, working on a painted floor, was suggesting that experienced escort commanders had been looking in the wrong direction. Other officers pushed back. Yes, the maneuver might be possible. Yes, a brilliant German commander might attempt it once. But repeatable doctrine? A pattern? A reason for the terrible losses? That was harder to swallow. So Roberts asked for a demonstration. The demonstration took place at Derby House. Senior escort officers stood behind the cloth screens and commanded the Allied ships. They were given the same limits a real escort commander faced at sea. Incomplete sight, delayed information, confusion, pressure. Roberts and Laidlaw played the U-boat. They surfaced astern, entered the convoy screen, fired into the middle, dived, waited, escaped behind the convoy. The escort commanders responded with Buttercup. They moved outward. They protected the wrong water. The simulated convoy was torn apart. That was the moment the argument ended. Noble acted. Roberts was promoted. The new tactic went to the Admiralty, and Jean Laidlaw gave it a name with a kind of dry defiance Britain understood perfectly. Raspberry, as in blowing a raspberry at Hitler. But raspberry was not a joke. It changed the geometry of the fight. Under the new tactic, when a torpedo struck, escorts at the side and rear did not simply chase outward after a suspected contact. They swept the rear and the perimeter in line abreast, driving forward with ASDIC active. Forward escorts zigzagged ahead. The point was no longer to punish an outside attacker. The point was to close the back door. If a U-boat had entered the convoy from astern, its escape route was now blocked by the very escorts it expected to find looking somewhere else. By the summer of 1942, raspberry was being taught and spread through escort groups. It did not make the Atlantic safe. Nothing could. The ocean was still vast. The weather still broke formations. U-boats still found targets. Men still went into water so cold it could kill before a rescue ship arrived. But now the escorts had a tactic aimed at the real attack. And in the North Atlantic, that difference could decide whether a convoy lived long enough to reach port. April 21st, 1943. Convoy on 5 left Liverpool for Halifax. 43 merchant ships, 7 escorts. Commander Peter Gretton and Escort Group B7. It was a slow convoy in a violent ocean, and Dönitz saw his chance. He threw U-boats into the hunt until 51 were committed against on 5. His commanders understood the stakes. This was supposed to be the battle that broke the convoy system. Then the weather turned savage. The escorts were scattered. Seas rose so hard some ships could not hold station. Gretton himself, low on fuel, had to leave the convoy and hand over command. By the night of May 4th, U-boats were all around on 5, 25 in direct contact. More reported in the wider area. The attack came in darkness. Ships were hit. Selvestan went down by the stern. Garinda went down by the bow. The freighter Bombay broke apart. 3 vessels were lost in minutes. This was the moment the old doctrine would have pulled the escorts outward. But the escorts of On 5 had Raspberry, HMS Pink, HMS Snowflake, HMS Loosestrife. Flower-class corvettes, small, wet, stubborn ships, slower than the submarines they were hunting on the surface. They swept the rear, line abreast, ASDIC active, searching the escape route. The U-boats that surfaced behind the convoy, expecting darkness and empty water, found escorts already moving toward them. Then fog came down over the battle. For the German commanders, the fog was a curse. They could hear the convoy, but they could not see well enough to aim. For the escorts, the fog did not blind ASDIC. By the time the action ended, 13 Allied merchant ships had been sunk, roughly 63,000 gross register tons. That was terrible. But it was not victory for Dönitz. 6 U-boats had been destroyed. 4 more had been damaged badly enough to abandon the fight. For the U-boat arm, the arithmetic was changing, not gradually, all at once. Dönitz's staff called the battle the catastrophe of On 5, and it did not stand alone. The next convoys told the same story in sharper form. In 3 May battles, 7 Allied ships were lost and 7 U-boats were destroyed. Then convoy SC-130 was attacked by 33 U-boats. Not one merchant ship was lost sunk. Among the dead was Peter Dönitz, the admiral's own son, lost aboard U-954. On May 24, 1943, Karl Dönitz withdrew his U-boat force from the North Atlantic convoy routes. He called the withdrawal temporary. It was not. The Battle of the Atlantic did not end that day. The U-boats would return. The war at sea would continue until 1945, but the month of May 1943 became the point historians return to, because after that the old calculation no longer held. The convoy system had not been broken. The hunters had become hunted, and part of the reason was a tactical answer built by people the old Navy had not expected to need. WATO kept working. When the Germans adapted, the unit adapted again. Raspberry was followed by other tactics with deceptively harmless names. Pineapple, banana. The names sounded ridiculous. The work was not. More than 5,000 Allied naval officers passed through the WATO course. British, Canadian, American, Australian, Free French, Polish. Among them was Prince Philip, then a young naval officer. 66 Wrens served in the unit during the war. They moved wooden ships across painted squares. They made captains fight battles they had already lost. They forced experienced men to see what their own reports were telling them. And then, when the war ended, most of them disappeared back into civilian life. They had signed the Official Secrets Act. They did not explain the floor. They did not describe the screens. They did not tell their families how many convoy tactics had passed through their hands. One senior naval officer would later say his own mother had served at WATO and still never told him what she had done. Gilbert Roberts received a formal honor. He took Jean Laidlaw to Buckingham Palace with him, sharing the moment informally with the team. But the Wrens themselves received no formal decoration. Laidlaw returned to civilian life. In 1951, she became one of the first women admitted as a Fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. One of only a handful of women accepted that year. It fits in a strange way. The woman who found the hidden submarine route had always known how to read a ledger. Only this ledger was written in ships, miles, bearings, and missing men. The Battle of the Atlantic lasted from September 3, 1939 to May 8, 1945. 2,074 days. The longest continuous military campaign of the Second World War, and one of its tactical turning points began in a room where a young woman, barred from the sea, studied the sea more clearly than many men commanding ships upon it. She saw that the Navy had been defending the edge while the enemy was killing from the center. She put the submarine where the evidence said it had to be. Then she helped build the answer. Her name was Jean Laidlaw. She was 21 years old, and she saw the ocean from a painted floor.